Good morning, my brothers and sisters. What happens when Jesus calls me? I specifically want to look at today, what does it cost? What do I gain? What do I lose? So we're going to look at profession and possessions and preferences. And then what do I gain? Well, that's the person and the people and payment for sin. So here's a first thought. The following of Jesus costs you something. And maybe you'd be inclined to follow Jesus, but you're counting the cost and wondering about it. So surely the first disciples give up something, and there's an accounting that happens with them as they start to follow Jesus. So Jesus says to Andrew and Peter in Matthew chapter 4, our official verse for today, verse 19, "Follow me and I will make you fishers of men." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. So they gain Jesus. They gain this new job description, which is to be fishers of men. But don't go too fast. The Christian life costs something. So they leave their nets. It's something they probably were good at. Literally, they were professions, and fish kept them alive. So they had learned written rules and unwritten rules. And coming to Jesus kind of flipped that on their ear. So some professions will have to be left entirely to follow Jesus. And there are some, like that the Lord may call you into professional pastors and things like that, or professional full-time church work. And then there are some like Paul, where the Lord will call people into full-time church work, but he doesn't leave his side hustle, which is tent making. For the most part, I think, most professions are going to need to be renewed, changed, with you now working for Jesus. So if you knew that following Jesus would cost you something, would you do it? And what if that cost was significant? So let's look at the next set of guys that come to the Lord. This is also in chapter 4, the next couple verses. And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in the boat with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets, and he called them. So what's going to happen? Well, verse 22, immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. So these two brothers leaves some nets with holes in them, but they probably were their favorite nets of great value, because it was intimate with them. They knew their ins and outs of their particular physical item, and as if their life literally depended on it. And then they leave three other things. They leave a boat. That's got to be a precious item, as it extends your reach on the Sea of Galilee. Then they leave their father. So this addresses the relational cost of establishing a relationship with Jesus. So some relationship have the cost of initiation. So you're going to get a new relationship with a pastor, a new relationship with a fellowship group, a new relationship with the people that you serve. So you make new family in a sense. And then there's some relationships that have a cost, an ending cost. Those that you may have been engaged with sins with, marker people of your old life. And perhaps those, like their father, who now don't agree with this wholehearted following of Jesus. And then the third thing they leave, so first they leave their possessions and their people, and then the third thing they leave is their plans. And I think they immediately do this. So Jesus is making a call, follow me, to Andrew and Peter, and then seeing James and John, he calls them. And to obtain the great treasure, that is Jesus, he has to change something, which is the will. So he calls them, and sweeter words have never been spoken in the history of the world. Oh, to be called by the Lord. I wonder if they're ready. Perhaps you are being called by the Lord, and you're counting the cost right now. So on one hand, how could any human be prepared to receive a call from the Savior? The fact that the Holy One has come down to dwell with us, to be our Emmanuel, our God with us, is infinitely above our pay grade. And if you consider what Jesus will do for them personally and endure for them, it's to boggle the mind. On the other hand, these guys seem somehow prepared enough that when Jesus walks by and the call comes, they are ready. So had the Lord given them some sort of a heads up? Now we know when Nathanael was called in John chapter 1, it's not mentioned in Matthew, Nathanael was ready. So Nathanael says to him, "How do you know me?" Jesus walks by and says, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there's no deceit." And Nathanael's curious about this. "How do you know me?" And Jesus answered him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." And then Nathanael answers him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God." So he sees the Lord, or has an interaction with the Lord actually before his call. So when the call comes, he's ready. So perhaps the hardest to sacrifice as one comes to the Lord, the most costly thing is not your profession, it's not your people, but it's your will, it's your preferences, it's the obedience, it's submitting to Jesus, his ways, and maybe his leaders. So by following Jesus, it will cost you something physically, a boat in the story here today, but new relationships with possessions, new relationship with generosity. Second thing is professionally. So new work, perhaps to call you to serve in the church, or more likely, it's making your work new, renewed enthusiasm for God-given work. And then finally, this volition, this pesky will that he would change our desires for less of what charmed us before and more of a desire for him. So here, obedience. Whose plans are they? Not my plans, but your plans. So let's ask this question as we close today. What happens when Jesus calls me? What does it cost? Well, maybe your profession, maybe your possessions, maybe your preferences, but what do you gain? You gain the person of infinite value, Jesus. Then you gain the people of the Lord, and you get payment for sin that you are incapable of ever paying. I suggest when the Lord calls, you say yes. Think about that today.